Chapter 21, A Meeting with the Malfoys. Draco lay awake for a long time on Sunday morning, surrounded by an unusual stillness. In that moment, there was no hint that the sleepy Potter cottage was the epicenter of the nation's rebellion against Lord Voldemort. The headquarters was wrapped in the tranquil hush of dawn, with only the sound of Hermione's steady breathing breaking the silence. He observed her frown in her sleep, as if she were still working through a complex puzzle in her mind. Over the past few days, Draco had come to appreciate how much he enjoyed watching Hermione, whether she was at rest or in motion, directing others with confidence or lost in thought, nibbling on a quill. Even more delightful were those moments when she seemed to remember him unexpectedly, pausing mid-step to scan the room until her gaze found his. For 6 years, he had watched Hermione Granger hurry through the halls of Hogwarts, yet somehow, during all that time, he had failed to truly see her. Now, he found himself reluctant to blink, afraid he might miss even a second of her presence. However, dawn was breaking outside, and soon he would need to head to Half-Hold Hill. In the bustle of preparing for the meeting, Draco had managed to suppress his dread for the past few days, but now, as he looked at Hermione's peaceful face, a new fear washed over him. What if his parents' presence at headquarters changed her feelings toward him? Surely, with his mother and father living alongside Hagrid, Hermione would start to recall their tumultuous third year together. He could still picture himself in the hospital wing that year, clutching his perfectly healed arm and writing home to insist that the injury should be grounds for firing the blundering half-wit responsible. Rising to his feet, Draco began to dress, feeling an urgent need to create some distance between them. A wave of frustration surged within him. His parents had always been strict when they wanted to be. They could have sent him a return owl urging him to heal quickly and return to his studies, but instead, they had seized the opportunity to rid Hogwarts of Hagrid. How many times had his father referred to the, as if carved from stone, betraying no emotion, the gamekeeper, a disgrace to the school, a savage, Dumbledore's pet barbarian? How many times had Draco echoed those sentiments? As he fastened his winter cloak, he struggled to clear his mind. Since that night at the manor, those thoughts had become inescapable. He found himself haunted by dreams of past actions and words, replaying them in his subconscious with such vividness that he awoke feeling unrest. Every action now carried an undercurrent of discomfort. Brushing his teeth, he recalled the moment when Hermione's front teeth had grown painfully long, her eyes brimming with tears as he, Crabbe, and Goyle erupted in laughter. At mealtimes, he couldn't shake her furious words in the room of hidden things, demanding he answer for Dobby, who had been beaten near daily while preparing his meals and cleaning his clothes. Draco chastised himself for this endless rumination. How pointless it felt. He reminded himself that, in Dobby's case, he had been too young to truly understand, yet, the thoughts persisted, gnawing at him. They made him want to push Hermione away, to shield her from his darkness. At the same time, he felt an overwhelming urge to cling to her, terrified that she would come to her senses and leave. His gaze drifted to the clock on the wall. It was time. He allowed himself one last glance at Hermione, who was stirring in her cotton pajamas. Then, with a flicker of magic, he disapparated. Half-Hold Hill was freezing and windswept, the sky a tortured shade of purple. As Draco surveyed his surroundings, he momentarily believed he was alone, that perhaps this was just another false trail. But then, two figures emerged from behind the solitary massive tree, its roots sunk deep into the hill. His father stood tall, still too thin from Azkaban, his hair a silver blonde. His mother's cheeks were chapped red from the biting wind. The Malfoys were not known for their expressions, but in that moment, Draco's parents gazed at him as if they had seen an apparition. Their faces a mix of apprehension and expectation. Betrayal, love, pain, and relief all collided within him. In that moment, Draco's fears were eclipsed by a new sensation that blossomed in his chest. He recalled the pride he had felt throughout his life, a pride in being a Malfoy. Though he had changed, he would always carry that legacy. Malfoys were known for their subtlety, confidence, resilience, and resourcefulness. They navigated every obstacle, always moving toward one another. "Mother," Draco greeted, his voice thin and slightly shaky. "Father." Without a word, they stepped forward and enveloped him in their embrace. Meanwhile, in a different part of the cottage, Fred chimed in lightly. No need to be nervous, Hermione, as he waved his fork in the air. None whatsoever, George added. If those pasty-gits say anything to you, we'll just collapse their tent while they're sleeping, Fred finished, his mouth still full of toast. Hermione attempted to smile. That's not what I'm nervous about. I can handle whatever they throw at me. Then why the worry? Luna asked, tilting her head with curiosity. To buy herself some time, Hermione took a long pause, chewing her eggs as if they were the most complex puzzle, but before she could respond, Professor McGonagall spoke up. I must admit, she said, her lips pressed together as she perched on the edge of her armchair. I have had a number of security concerns. Why, yes, Hermione replied, setting her plate down on the coffee table. Yes, but I believe our precautions should suffice. Confiscating the Malfoys' wands, for instance. She cleared her throat to project her voice across the front room. And remember, everyone, we're keeping the details of our plans within our smaller teams so that no one knows all the dates and specifics. That will be safer if anything goes wrong. As murmurs of agreement filled the room, Hermione glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. Draco said they'd arrive at 9:30. Tension hung in the air as the front room buzzed with anxious discussions, as Luna and Bill cleared away the dirty plates. Hermione feigned interest in a nearby stack of books, trying to steady her racing heart. Hermione glanced at the calendar for the upcoming month, having already checked it 4 times that morning. She wasn't lying when she said she wasn't concerned about what Lucius or Narcissa Malfoy might say to her. Instead, her worry centered on their influence over Draco. He had been on edge all week, dealing with 10 new people at headquarters, none of whom were making any effort to disguise their disdain for him. Who could say that with his parents in the mix, exuding the same blend of prejudice and superiority they had instilled in him throughout his life, he wouldn't regress into old habits? As Hermione reflected on the past few months spent under such carefully controlled conditions, learning to trust one another with their lives, everything suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable to so many new variables at once. She had talked with Draco about it the night before, but the conversation had felt strained. Are you ready to see them? She had murmured. Mostly, he replied, managing a half-smile, but I doubt I'll be winning any Son of the Year awards, Granger, after just burning down our house. She had offered a response that was a mix of a laugh and a wince, recalling how he looked after disapparating from the ruins of his home, stricken, with ash clinging to his brows like dark clusters of snow. I'm sorry about the manner, she whispered under the covers, realizing that in the chaos following the battle, she had never said those words before. You didn't cast the fiend fire, Draco had reassured her. I know, of course I didn't, but if I'd just gotten away from Flint a minute faster. You have nothing to be sorry for. A muscle had twitched in his jaw. You don't. You never have to say that to me. Hermione hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Draco's voice was strained, but not in the way she had anticipated. There was no anger or grief about his lost home. He held her gaze as if forcing himself to look into bright light, the fine muscles around his eyes tightening. Then he kissed her softly and murmured, I need sleep, before drifting off. That had been the end of it. Now, Hermione shuffled her notes again, wishing she had pushed the subject further. They had never truly defined their relationship. Draco wasn't her boyfriend. Even the term felt absurd in the midst of the war. Yet, faced with the possibility that he might distance himself, she found herself longing for some sort of assurance between them. What if all of this was merely a minor detour in his life? It isn't, she thought, glaring at the calendar with steely determination. Left to his own devices, this was the path Draco had chosen. This was who he really was, she believed that. Suddenly, her attention snapped up as 3 muffled crack sounds echoed from outside. The door swung open, and a hush fell over the order as Draco entered, flanked by Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy. Mr. and Mrs. Malfoy looked well-fed and impeccably groomed. Of course they did, having treated a muggle as a servant since their arrival in London. A wave of dislike surged within Hermione, and she noticed similar reactions from the others in the room. McGonagall's eyes were icy, while Hagrid's enormous hands clenched into fists as he glared at the man who had once tried to have Buckbeak executed. Ginny's mouth formed a hard line. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said curtly, though not rudely, stepping to the front of the group. "Mrs. Malfoy. Has Draco informed you of the conditions for staying here?" Lucius Malfoy's lip curled ever so slightly. "Yes, Potter." A shiver coursed down Hermione's spine. Even after all this time, she could still hear that smooth, satisfied voice echoing behind the mask at the Department of Mysteries. Wordlessly, Draco raised his mother's and father's confiscated wands. Harry nodded. "We'll keep your wands hidden and safe. In the event of an emergency, we'll return them to you immediately." "Very reassuring," Narcissa Malfoy replied in her cool, haughty tone. Harry's expression tightened. "Listen, we don't expect you to help us, but Professor Dumbledore promised that the Order would keep you safe. And we intend to keep that promise." After a moment, the Malfoys lowered their heads in slight, disdainful nods. "You'll be staying in our new tent," Fred said, his tone suggesting he would rather have set the tent on fire than let it serve that purpose. "It's equipped with its own kitchen," George added gruffly, "so you can eat in there." Harry nodded. "We'll bring you groceries once a week." Or, he hesitated, glancing between Hermione and Draco, "or, you could eat with the rest of us. But that means you'll need to pitch in with the chores whenever Hermione assigns them." Slowly, the Malfoys shifted their gaze to her, their expressions contorting as if they'd just been asked to sniff a clogged drain. Hermione straightened her back, feeling a surge of defiance flush her face, her thoughts clouding with the beginnings of anger. "Have you mistaken us for servants, Potter?" Lucius snapped, his voice taut, scrubbing dishes at the orders of a mudbull. Hermione felt the rest of the Order surge as one, ready to defend her, but they were too slow. In one swift motion, Draco stepped in front of his father, blocking Hermione from view. "No," he said, the words slicing through the tension. A heavy silence settled in the front room, Draco's narrow shoulders rising and falling as he caught his breath. Several members of the Order stared at his back, and even the Malfoys looked at their son as if they were seeing him for the first time. Draco smoothed back his hair, and Hermione noticed the slight tremor in his fingertips. "No," he repeated, his breathing still unsteady. "We wouldn't be the only ones working, Father, because Hermione," he placed a slight emphasis on her name, "divides it all evenly." The silence lingered, and Hermione only realized she was biting her cheek when she tasted blood. Blood drained from Lucius's face, leaving him a glazed white, reminiscent of fine china. Hermione braced herself for an outburst, an angry demand to know if his son had been confounded or worse. But it was Narcissa who regained her composure first. Adjusting her fur-lined cloak, she scrutinized Draco's face and said slowly, "Yes, Draco. We'll take dinner here, then." Lucius glanced at his wife. After a long pause, he nodded once. Hermione exchanged a startled look with Harry. They had extended this olive branch for Draco's sake, hoping to ease the palpable tension in headquarters. They hadn't genuinely expected the Malfoys to agree to share mealtimes with the Order. As Fred and George led the Malfoys down the hall toward the back door, Draco hurried upstairs with his parents' wands, and a flicker of cautious optimism sparked within Hermione. Not only had Draco stood up to his parents, but they hadn't turned on him for it. It seemed that his word held more weight for them than their right to voice their prejudices. Draco had once told her that his mother and father never associated with anyone outside the pure-blood world. She had often wondered if things might have been different had they grown up in another environment. Now, as the Malfoys disappeared through the back exit, she contemplated whether Draco could be the one to offer them that chance after all. Draco was acutely aware of the increased scrutiny from the Order that day. "You'd think I killed someone," he muttered when he and Hermione finally slipped into the reading room after lunch. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied with a smile. "It's quite the opposite. You defended me to your parents." The others are starting to realize they've made some poor assumptions over the past week. As she spread out their notes, Draco forced himself to look away, pretending to browse the books in the library. He heard the pleasure in her voice, yet shame coiled tightly in his stomach. It felt far too generous to call what he had done an act of courage. he had intended to make a stand. It had begun that way, certainly. Draco had stepped forward, determined to confront his father with the iciest of tones, vowing never to let him speak that word to Hermione again or even look at her with such disdain. But as he gazed into his parents' faces, he noticed their alarm at his boldness. In that moment of confusion, he couldn't bear the thought of embarrassing them or leaving them isolated in a room full of people who already despised them. But I should have done it, Draco thought, a bitter taste rising in his throat. Any other member of the Order would have told his father to stop using that word, to treat Hermione with the respect she deserved. Yet here he was, Draco, the one who needed to atone, faltering at the last moment. He even tortured himself with the thought that perhaps Hermione would have been better off with the Weasley king, who would have at least had the courage to stand up to his father. Naturally, his parents didn't bring it up at lunch. The meal hadn't been entirely unbearable, thanks to his strategic decision to seat them near Fleur and Luna, who seemed to harbor the least animosity towards Lucius and Narcissa. At the end of the meal, he told his parents, somewhat stiffly, that he would be spending the day in the library, but even that contained a lie of omission. He hadn't mentioned that he'd be with Hermione and Potter in the library, still hadn't admitted that he had joined the Order. He had made no real gestures toward the person he believed he was becoming, and if he was hiding that person, concealing his choices, didn't it render them meaningless? Draco stared hard at a peeling volume of counter-jinxes. Coward, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. Soon enough, Potter arrived after washing up, and Draco struggled to focus as they passed the afternoon in slow frustration. They tried an extensive list of hexes and counter-curses in an attempt to open Slytherin's locket, but all their efforts were in vain. Meanwhile, Gryffindor's sword lay uselessly on the table, waiting for a breakthrough that never came, the sofa behind them. After a few hours of examining the locket, Potter turned it over and over in his hands. Do either of you know what this locket was meant for? Meant for? Hermione echoed, her brow furrowing in thought. Yeah, Gryffindor's sword appears to the brave, and the diadem makes you cleverer. Does this locket have a story like that? Sure, Draco replied, though it's not much help to us now that it's a Horcrux. It was supposed to hold a secret. A secret? Hermione asked, her curiosity piqued. You mean like a secret keeper with the Fidelius charm? Draco nodded. Some believe Salazar Slytherin invented the Fidelius charm, and it was based on the locket's enchantment. If the wearer was a Slytherin, they could lock a secret inside the locket, and it would never open, nor could the secret be revealed. Potter considered the locket thoughtfully. What if we whispered a secret into it? Maybe we need to bribe it with information or something. One by one, they took the locket to a quiet corner of the library, whispering their secrets to it, but nothing happened. The locket's stubbornness was so disheartening that they eventually abandoned it to discuss Hufflepuff's cup instead. Even though they had no leads to follow. Despite the lack of information on the cup, the upcoming weeks promised to be busy. As evening approached, Hermione spread out She's instructions and explained what they needed to do to find the Elder Wand. It's a spell-directed compass, she said. I hoped it would be a simple spell we could learn quickly, so we could start looking for the wand now. But we'll need to steep a compass in a specific potion that takes 3 weeks to brew. During that time, we'll also need to master a rather tricky spell to control the compass once it's ready. So for 3 weeks, we just hope Snape doesn't find the wand first. Potter asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Potter raked his fingers through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. And what? We just hope he doesn't hurt Ron in the process, Potter, Draco sighed, trying to keep the conversation grounded. We still don't even know if Snape has Weasley, or if he's aware that he's the master of the Elder Wand. Hermione nodded with determination, though her voice wavered slightly as if she were convincing herself. Yes. Snape may not even know the Elder Wand exists. It's a complicated situation. As evening descended, Harry left to check on the rest of the Order, leaving Hermione and Draco alone in the library. One more thing, Hermione said, tucking Gryffindor's sword back into her small beaded bag. Yeah? Draco replied, his stomach sinking. Her tone sounded guarded, as if she were reconsidering something. Maybe she had been reflecting on his interaction with his father. Perhaps she, too, felt it wasn't enough. I found a lead on an unraveling charm that I believe can undo the magic of your dark mark." Draco's mind went momentarily blank. She turned to face him, her expression resolute. "I know it'll be an unpleasant process," she rushed on. "And, unfortunately, we'll have to experiment, which could be risky, but with so many Order members in Azkaban and what you told Pansy, we should prepare for your secrecy to be compromised." Just get it off me," Draco interrupted, surprised by how low and ragged his voice sounded. Hermione paused, concern flickering in her eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure, whatever it takes," he replied, his jaw clenched tightly. "I want it gone. Every time I see it, I think of what Voldemort did," she finished for him. Draco looked at her, feeling another pang in his chest. Of what I did, he thought, but he couldn't bring himself to voice it. Hermione narrowed her eyes. "You've been acting strange all afternoon. Is it about your parents?" "Yeah." She sighed. "Well, we always knew it would be complicated when we've arrived, haven't we?" she said, pausing for a moment. "In some ways, I thought it seemed promising." "Promising?" A slightly deranged laugh escaped Draco. "What about that little introduction was promising?" Hermione didn't laugh. Instead, she lifted her chin with a dignified air and replied, "They listened to you." Draco hesitated, the twisted non-smile fading from his face. He had been so focused on his weak defense that he hadn't truly considered his parents' reaction to it, but Hermione was right. He had never challenged his parents' authority in public before. Any disagreements had always been kept private, where they wouldn't tarnish the family's image as an unshakable unit. Yet, they hadn't reprimanded him for speaking out. "That's true," he said slowly. He and Hermione shared a long, tense glance. The thought that his parents might actually accept this, was something he had never allowed himself to consider. It felt too good to be true, almost unreal, and yet, they had never spent this much time in Muggle London before. Was it so impossible that they had softened, even just a little, perhaps not enough for full acceptance or even tolerance, but enough for Draco to keep them in this new life? He needed to talk to them. Draco's mouth felt dry as he bent to enter his parents' tent. The Weasley twins' second creation was just as gaudy and over-decorated as the first, although thankfully, this tent was spared the Gryffindor color scheme. "Draco," his mother said with a small smile, and once again, he felt the surrealness wash over him. The fact that he could simply walk into a tent and see them after so many months of wondering if they were even alive. His mother and father sat at the head of a beautifully crafted mahogany table, exuding a casual elegance, as if posing for a portrait. The sight reminded Draco of the time he had brought his OWL results to share with them at the Manor's grand banquet table. His parents had not been outright dismissive. Displeased, achieving 9 OWLs, with 4 outstanding results in potions, transfiguration, history of magic, and astronomy, was no small feat, yet, he sensed their disappointment, which had cast a chill over the table for the entire week. Draco felt his mouth go dry, and an itch began to creep up his throat. He stepped closer to the table. Despite chastising himself all day for not defending Hermione more vigorously, it felt almost pitiful that he had managed to utter a single word in her favor. His parents exchanged a glance. His father gave his mother the faintest shake of his head, as if to caution her. Draco narrowed his eyes. But before he could inquire about their apparent discussion, Lucius said, "Come sit, Draco." His father slid a tumbler across the table, filled with a generous measure of fire whiskey. They clearly expected him, and they showed no hesitation in indulging from the well-stocked cabinet of the Weasley twins. Draco took the tumbler and settled into the chair at his father's left. "Thank you," he said, bracing himself. "Father, I wanted to talk about what happened in the cottage earlier." "There's nothing to explain, Draco," his father replied smoothly. "We understand." You do?" "Of course. Trapped in this place, surrounded by all this." Lucius let his gaze drift toward the tent flap. Distaste curling his lip. "Naturally, you need to play by their rules. We all must, for now, so we surrender our wands and speak civilly to the half-breeds and the rest." I lost my composure. You've been who you needed to be to stay safe, his mother said, placing her delicate hand over Draco's. And you've done well besides, Draco, his father added, rising to his feet. You've remained unharmed, brought us here, and you've even kept your distance. Potter. Lucius strolled over to the enchanted window, which revealed a dark, moonlit slope blanketed in snow. He took a sip of his fire whiskey. Perhaps you could have made more decisive moves, but given the circumstances, assimilation was the best strategy. Draco remained silent and still. With every word, his heart sank further. This was why they had accepted his interruption. His parents believed he was merely trying to fit in with the order, a matter of image. They were as rigid and resolute as ever. When he finally told them the truth, he would face the very resistance he had dreaded. Draco pulled his hand from beneath his mother's and raised his glass of fire whiskey to his lips, determined not to let his hands tremble. The manner, he managed to say, another evasion, and once again, the thought pierced through his mind. Coward, we know you're not to blame, Narcissa said quickly, though her expression tightened. Lucius let out a short, cold laugh. I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that our home became a sacrifice to the cause. Why should Dumbledore's followers care about sites of wizarding history? But that was Crabbe, Draco interjected hastily, the fiendfire. The prophet reported it differently. Skeeter was. Lucius dismissed Draco's shaky explanation with a simple wave of his hand, his eyes still fixed coldly on the tent flap. If the people in that cottage hadn't chosen to attend that gala, Draco, our family would still have its ancestral seat. They are to blame. Always remember who is to blame, he added, leaning in slightly and giving Draco a brief nod, an unspoken bond of trust in that small gesture. Draco closed his eyes and envisioned the manor engulfed in flames. If he revealed that he had joined the order, his parents would ultimately lay the loss of their home at his feet. His stomach churned. How could he possibly express any of this? How could he take their willingness to see the best in him and shatter it to pieces? Shreds? But alongside his fears simmered resentment and frustration. How could they remain unchanged after last year's humiliations? Draco took another sip of fire whiskey, knowing he had to start somewhere. Pragmatism was key. His parents had always valued what was most advantageous for the family. It seemed as good an angle as any. I've been thinking. Father. Mother. His voice rose higher, betraying his nerves. I believe it's safer for our family to stay with the order rather than go abroad. His parents exchanged one of those inscrutable looks that sent a chill down his spine. Lucius set his tumbler on a bookshelf and replied, Draco, come now, you must think more ambitiously. Consider the best option. True, our place in society isn't abroad, but it certainly isn't. He gestured dismissively at the tent, contempt twisting his narrow face. Here, you may enjoy some superficial comforts with the order, but it is the Dark Lord's vision that has always been the grandest and most comprehensive. Draco stared into the gray eyes that mirrored his own, struggling to comprehend. His father spoke as if the past year and a half hadn't occurred, as if he somehow expected them to rejoin Voldemort. Wait, Draco interjected, trying to mask his rising suspicion. Last summer, we discussed leaving the country, America, New Zealand. We believed that was our only chance. Circumstances change, Draco. We mustn't settle for a lesser option but it's better here than it was at the manor. Draco exclaimed, his grip tightening around the fire whiskey glass. His heart pounded in his ears. Why did speaking to his parents make him feel like such a child? Last year was a nightmare, we all know that. We can't go back to that. Everything was far better for our family when the entire country thought he was dead. Lucius paled, and Narcissa flinched. Draco noticed her eyes darting to the side, an old habit, as if she were bracing herself for someone to enter, overheard their disloyalty. Lucius then spoke, adopting the fervent tone of a politician delivering a stirring speech. Draco, you've never witnessed the Dark Lord's world at its finest. You've only seen the chaos of transition. Before you were born, we experienced a freedom you can hardly fathom. Purebloods were honored as we deserved, not trampled by this parade of lesser wizards, half-breeds and subhumans, clamoring for more and more. Lucius strode back to the table, gripping the back of the upholstered chair at its head. The lines etched into his face, deepened by Azkaban, were more pronounced than ever. The world of the Dark Lord is the world you deserve. It's what this family and our descendants are entitled to. Once his reign is established, with us on the right side, every door will be open to you. Draco slammed his glass onto the table. That's what Aunt Bella told me before I started school last year. Just do this, and we'll have everything. But it didn't turn out that way, did it? His heart raced, and he was on the verge of shouting. Before he could say another word, his mother rose to her feet, exuding the icy poise she always possessed. I feared this had happened, she said, urgency lacing her voice. Being around these people has taken its toll on you. You must stop speaking this way, Draco. Why? Who cares? Draco laughed bitterly, rising to his feet as well. Are we planning to sign back up if the resistance collapses? You really think the Death Eaters will take us back after we faked our deaths to escape them? His father moved to stand beside his mother. Narcissa clutched Lucius's arm tightly, and they exchanged one last, meaningful glance. There is a way, Lucius murmured. We are here, Draco. We must watch and wait, as we always have. Potter has clearly come to trust you. We must remain open to opportunities. Do you understand? Draco struggled to swallow, the lump in his throat growing heavier. His throat felt as hard as concrete. He understood exactly what all those euphemisms meant. Cursing his own foolishness, he wondered how he could have failed to plan for this. Of course, his parents, now welcomed into the headquarters of the Order, would be intent on using the valuable information they had. With their wands taken, they were undoubtedly viewing him as the linchpin of their scheme, relying on him to reach out to the Death Eaters. He could sense the tension in his parents' shoulders as they waited for a cue from him. But before Draco could gather his thoughts to speak, a voice called from outside, Draco, it was Potter. Are you in there? Draco jumped, stammering, why yeah. Potter poked his head through the tent flap. You're needed inside. Draco could feel his parents bristle at the thought of him being summoned by Harry Potter, but they remained silent. He stepped away from the mahogany table, walking stiffly toward Potter, but just as he reached the edge of the Persian rug, he slowed and then halted. Turning on his heel, he looked back at his parents. Everything he had come to say flooded his mind. He could almost see it unfolding, hear himself declaring, I wasn't acting just to fit in with the Order, I've joined them. I'm done with the Death Eaters and everything they taught me to believe. The Muggle-born girl you tried to insult earlier, she trusts me more than you ever did. She cares about who I really am, not who she thinks I should be. I'm working with her and Potter to defeat the Dark Lord, and in the end, it will be better for our family. You won't stop us. He imagined his mother breaking down in tears, crying, my own son, a blood traitor? Would his father explode with rage, ordering him to get out in a way that was both terrifying and heartbreaking? Would they shut him out forever? Even if the Horcruxes were destroyed and the world returned to what it once was, would his parents truly bar him from their lives? Would Draco find himself penniless and alone, cut off from the only family he had ever known? Relaying his betrayal to every family that had once welcomed him into their homes felt like an insurmountable weight. My bedroom is in the cottage, Draco murmured to the rug, his voice carefully neutral. So I'll see you at breakfast. He could sense their eyes boring into his back as he walked away. The word echoed in his mind, heavy and damning, coward. The tent fell silent for a long moment after Draco had left. Well, Narcissa finally said, settling back down at the dining table, I see no evidence of a confundus or imperius. No, Lucius replied, frowning. But he spoke about the Order with far too much leniency. It seems Potter has influenced him. He shook his head, concern etched on his face. It was wise, after all, not to tell him right away. He might have given us up out of fear. Narcissa reached beneath her robe, retrieving Bellatrix's mirror from a concealed pocket. She turned it over in her hands, lost in thought. Did Potter sway him, Lucius, or was it the events of the last year? Draco is right. The manor was a dreadful place while the Dark Lord made it his base of operations. The Dark Lord himself nearly took Draco's life. Narcissa, Lucius said, sitting at the head of the table and gently cradling her hands. We have no choice. To flee abroad would invite your sister to hunt us down to our deaths. Our time is running short. With Order members in Azkaban under interrogation, we may not be able to remain hidden for much longer, even with Bella suppressing the information. Our only real chance is to capture Potter or obtain information equally vital to the Dark Lord and return to the Death Eaters before we are exposed. Narcissa avoided his gaze, but Lucius leaned closer, allowing her to see the fear etched on his face, the fear of being returned to the custody of the Dementors. What is the alternative? He whispered harshly. Join the Order, associate ourselves with that throng of part humans and werewolves? His face contorted in disgust. Have we really sunk so low? No, Narcissa replied softly, though her mind was still reeling from what Draco had said. It wasn't entirely surprising that her son would sympathize with the Order's aims, even if he found the group itself repugnant. If the Dark Lord were defeated, the world would revert to the one he had grown up in, a world where he had felt so secure. Narcissa reflected, we were comfortable too. They had commanded respect, although it was true they had to suppress their opinions on mudbloods and other such matters due to the shifting cultural landscape. Still, Lucius was right. They represented the union of the Malfoy and Black lines, the culmination of two powerful houses. The mere thought of allying with the unsavory members of the Order made her feel fragile. Even sharing mealtimes with a half-giant, that mudblood girl, and a family of blood traitors was unbearable. Despite the purpose being to glean information from the Order's whispers, Narcissa couldn't help but think of what Bellatrix would have said. Scum, she thought vaguely, with a sense of disdain, yet she couldn't ignore that her mudblood brother-in-law had gone into hiding. A prickling sensation ran through her as she wondered if Andromeda would ever come to this place, the fallen Black sister, erased from the family portrait, lost to her decades ago. When Narcissa closed her eyes, she tried to recall her sister's face, but all that met her was darkness. Meanwhile, Draco followed Potter into Hermione's bedroom. She stood by the bed, where the locket lay, with the sword of Gryffindor gleaming silver beside its golden chain. As soon as the door clicked shut, Hermione flicked her wand toward it and whispered, Muffliato. Draco unfastened his winter cloak and tossed it over the armchair before joining Potter at the bed, standing before the Horcrux. You figured out how to open it? He asked, peering down at the locket. Draco nodded. We haven't tried it yet, but we're fairly certain. Yeah, Potter replied, looking a bit sheepish. It's ridiculous how simple it seems. We were discussing how Slytherin would want to keep his secret safe, and then I thought about the chamber, and Draco let out an exasperated sigh. Parselton. It felt doubly embarrassing that he, a Slytherin, hadn't thought of it right away. We think you should destroy it, Potter said. It took a moment for the words to sink in. Sorry, Potter, Draco said, but I could have sworn you just asked me to destroy my own house relic with Gryffindor's sword. Exactly. That's why, you're a Slytherin. A pureblood, a Malfoy, maybe it could help somehow. Draco pondered for a long moment, his gaze shifting from the sword to the locket. Hermione was watching him intently. What? He asked, raising an eyebrow at her. I know what you're thinking, she replied. If she had been anyone else, he might have challenged her assertion. Instead, he returned his focus to the objects laid out before him. She continued, We're not asking you to do this because we want you to renounce Slytherin or anything like that. That's not what this is about. We understand that Slytherin is a part of you. Draco met her gaze for a fleeting second, some of his doubt beginning to fade. It was, in fact, exactly what he had been considering. Slytherin had given him a sense of community, a value system, a complex mix of pride and persecution. He could never be anything else, and, more importantly, he didn't want to abandon this part of himself. Draco understood what the rest of Hogwarts stubbornly refused to acknowledge, that the ancient house of cunning and ambition, though they presented a united front, was made up of individuals with their own complexities. Slytherin may have included Crabbe and Millicent, who aligned themselves with power without even. Loyal to their own friends, Pansy and Goyle stood by Draco, defending him to the Carrows, all while maintaining their disdain for the rest of the world. Insecure Theo and detached Blaze lingered nearby, waiting to see how events would unfold. Slytherin was a murky fog, filled with uncertainty and the struggle of not having all the answers. It embodied the long conflict that preceded resolution. Slytherin was Draco himself, and each day he faced the challenge of defining what that truly meant. With a trembling hand, he reached for the sword. "All right," Potter said, "suddenly all business. I'll open it, and you be ready for whatever comes out." "Got it?" He was already picking up the Horcrux and placing it on a patch of floor enchanted to resemble stone. Draco gave a nervous nod and stepped forward, wrapping his fingers around the hilt of the sword. A hiss escaped Potter's lips, and the locket snapped open. Inside, the mirrored surfaces reflected two dark eyes, gleaming with a cunning hunger. Although Draco had never seen them so young and untainted by madness, he recognized them instantly as the eyes of Tom Riddle. But as Draco lifted Gryffindor's sword, those eyes flashed red, and from their crimson depths, a ghostly gray substance began to swirl, forming a silhouette. Draco staggered back, but the figure that emerged was not an enemy. It wasn't Aunt Bella or even Lord Voldemort. Instead, the face staring back at him was his own, sniveling and stricken, a haunting echo of his 6th year, a voice, part his own and part the sibilant hiss of Riddle, emanated from the locket as the spectral version of Draco wept and gasped, terrified and desperate. "Draco Malfoy, sworn to eternal loyalty in my service. I see all that you long for." Draco blanched. The voice, though partially his, was as chilling as the one that still occasionally jolted him awake from nightmares. The sword in his hand dipped. "You desire an end to fear. You long for freedom. But if you continue down this path, you will never truly be free. When you gaze into the mirror, you will always see a coward, never healed, never whole." The ghostly figure of Draco contorted in anguish. Panic flashed across his face, a defensive panic that bordered on hatred. He instinctively knew what lay in the unseen distance: accusations, the loathing of countless voices. Someone was calling his name from far away, but the sound was lost to him. He vaguely recalled being in a bedroom, but that memory was slipping away, leaving only the locket glowing ominously on the ground. "The others will never truly forgive," the voice hissed on. "They will never truly forget. You seek a new path, but you chose your road long ago." Suddenly, two familiar figures emerged from the locket, flanking him, Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy, one on each shoulder, gazing down at him with radiant pride. The panicked ghost of Draco straightened, growing taller, his features relaxing as an air of smug certainty enveloped him. The spectral Draco opened his mouth, and the words flowed out. "When I return to the service of the Dark Lord," Riddle Draco declared, "my parents will love me as they always have. I will be self-possessed and proud. I will finally be true to myself, to my family's wishes, to who I have always been. I will never again grovel beneath the hatred and judgments of lesser beings." In that moment, Draco felt the seductive rush of relief wash over him, the allure of abandoning his struggles to become exactly who he was expected to be, forever, the destructive shame that had plagued him for weeks, the guilt that had begun to seep into his very being, could be erased. The world around him faded to darkness. Illuminated only by the locket's golden glow and the mist of the apparition, the figure extended its hand, and Draco found himself lifting his own toward it. But, from a great distance, Draco heard two voices echoing through the air. The sounds were faint and far away, yet something in their tone drew him in. "Draco," they called, "stab it. Draco." In that moment, he realized there was no hatred or judgment in those voices, only a deep concern for his safety, a sense of urgency, and a thread of trust. As he looked up into the ghostly figure of himself, he thought, "No." His hands tightened around the hilt of the sword. His mother and father had made promises in the tent, and if he couldn't accept them from his parents, he certainly wouldn't accept them from Voldemort, his torturer, no longer his master. He would never believe that lie again. No, he was not a coward. He was a Malfoy, a Slytherin, and a seeker, always diving after what he desired. What he truly longed for was a world that didn't yet exist, the one that glimmered in some deep recess of his mind. The word surged up his throat, struggling to escape, until it finally burst forth in a strangled cry, "No." With one fierce motion, Draco thrust the sword through the heart of the locket. The Horcrux screamed as it shattered. In an instant, the apparition dissolved, and the light of the bedroom flooded back in, grounding him once more. He staggered back, sweat trickling down his forehead, until the backs of his legs hit the bed and he collapsed. The sword slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground. He felt too small, firm hands gripping his shoulders tightly, enough to ache, but he kept his eyes squeezed shut. He couldn't bring himself to look at Hermione. He knew she and Harry had heard every word. A long minute of silence passed as he focused on steadying his breath and wiping away the sweat. That's what it was about. Harry's voice broke the stillness. "With your parents." Hermione's hands released him, and Draco finally cracked open his eyes as she asked, "What? What happened with his parents?" "Nothing," he murmured under his breath. Draco could feel his cheeks flush. "It's not nothing," Potter insisted. "And if you've had a fight with them, or they're planning to say something about you too," he glanced back and forth between Draco and Hermione, "to everyone else, that's going to be my problem, so you'd better tell me." "I said it's nothing," Draco replied through gritted teeth, but they weren't going to let him drop it. "What did they say?" Hermione asked, her tone bracing for the worst. Draco looked between them, his heart pounding. In the aftermath of the Horcrux's assault, he felt exposed, completely laid bare, every inch of him stung with vulnerability. Throughout his life, he'd been taught that his family's affairs were not just secrets, but sacred. The thoughts and feelings of the Malfoy collective were never meant to be shared. He would never have confided in Crabbe or Goyle about what had happened in the tent, but suddenly, it hit him, Harry Bloody Potter, simply by being present as his feelings for Hermione had developed, knew more about his inner life than Crabbe or Goyle ever had. Before he knew it, the words were spilling out of him. He vented his frustrations about his parents' loyalty to the Dark Order, repeating every word they had just told him. "All that," he spat, "after the Dementors fed off my father's body for a year on the Dark Lord's orders. All of that after the Dark Lord threatened to kill me. And I can tell what they want. They want us to gather information from the Order, and I'm supposed to sneak it back to the Dark Lord somehow. They think that'll make everything better, but it won't, and if they think it will, there. But Draco had reached the end of his anger, and at its conclusion, he found only hopelessness. He spread one hand over his face, his teeth clenched tight, pain throbbed in his temples. He realized his parents would never change their minds, and he could never change his own. Draco saw that now, more clearly than ever. Outside of the Horcrux's surreal universe, everything felt less seductive, less appealing. The promises of power and superiority now seemed as hollow as fool's gold, shimmering under the unnatural light that had always danced upon the locket and the diadem. Lowering his hand, he stared at the shattered locket, a fragment of the Dark Lord's power. "I'll tell them," he said hoarsely. "I'm going back down now to tell them everything." Hermione steeled herself for Draco's confession, but he had barely risen from the bed when Harry interjected sharply, "No." Both Hermione and Draco turned to him in surprise. "Maybe." Harry continued quietly, "Maybe you shouldn't tell them the truth. It might be better for you to have a sort of cover story." Hermione began to grasp what Harry was suggesting, and a wave of dread washed over her. "Potter," Draco said, his effort to keep his voice steady evident. "Think about it," Harry urged. "We don't have a spy. We never really did, but what Snape pretended to do, you can actually do. Your dad said it himself, didn't he? You've stayed close to Potter. You could tell your parents they were right, and then later, you could convince the Death Eaters that you've done all this to kill me or turn me in, and that would get you close to the snake." "Harry, no," Hermione said, her heart racing, "this is too dangerous. Draco is skilled in occlumency, but he isn't Snape. You can't expect him to go back to Voldemort." Harry let out a frustrated sound. "I know it's dangerous, and if I were any good at occlumency, I'd do it myself, but we have to get close to Voldemort in the end. And what other option do we have? We need to reach Nagini, and that snake is always close to him." Draco's voice trembled with anger. Potter, I'm already seen as scum by everyone here. If I go back to the Death Eaters and pretend this was all a ruse, the Order will think they were right about me. But this is more important than your reputation, Harry said, his impatience growing. It's not about what people think, it's about getting to the Horcrux. Not important, is it? Draco's voice rose sharply. Then maybe you'd like everyone to believe what's being said about you. Everything the Ministry is claiming? But then, he added venomously, in your case, they've got one thing right. You did use a dark curse on a fellow student, which is more than I've ever done to anyone in our class, by the way. But you don't hear anyone mentioning that, you don't even hear me mentioning it. A flicker of guilt crossed Harry's face, and Hermione could tell he was recalling the moment he had cast Sectum Semper on Draco in that bathroom. Look, I am sorry about that, Harry said, his impatience now laced with guilt. But now's not the time to. I didn't know what that curse was supposed to do. I'd seen it written in Snape's book, and that's not the bloody point. Potter. Draco snapped through clenched teeth. My point is, all your life, you've been the boy who lived, Dumbledore's favorite. So when you cast that curse, nobody at Hogwarts blamed you. They assumed you made a mistake. For Merlin's sake, Draco let out a harsh laugh. Even I thought it was just some stupid error. We didn't look at that curse and say, of course, that's how Potter is. But I'm not. Draco's voice grew high and strained. Hermione felt a chill as his gaze shifted to her. Sweat still glistened on his brow from the Horcrux's attack, and his eyes were filled with a mix of desperation and fear. His eyes were so wide that he looked almost manic. I'm never going to live any of this down. Everything I've done will haunt me for the rest of my life. I can't add to the list, do you understand? A heavy silence followed. He sank back onto the bed, breathing heavily, his face turned away from them. Hermione exchanged a worried glance with Harry. It took a long moment before Harry found the words to respond. I didn't think about that, he admitted. Draco didn't snap back. But still, think about it, would you? You know how important this is. Draco nodded sharply. Harry glanced at Hermione, who nodded in return, and then he slipped out the door. Once the door closed, Hermione moved closer to Draco. She settled on the edge of the bed beside him and took his hand in hers. He tensed, as if he might pull away. In the stillness, they both stared at the shattered remains of the Horcrux lying next to the sword of Gryffindor. So this is where you've been going, Hermione said quietly. This is why you let McGonagall say what she did at the lake, and this past week has been worse since the manor. After another long moment of silence, Draco took a shaky breath and nodded. His grip on her hand tightened. Being there, he said hoarsely, made me think about everything. I keep replaying the way I used to act, the things I said to you. Everything. Draco, I'm sorry. Hermione turned to look at him, but he couldn't meet her gaze. His voice was low and trembling, almost frightened. There was a quiver in his pointed chin, and he held her hand so tightly that she could feel his wrist begin to shake with the strain. I'm sorry for what I called you, Draco forced out. For what I did to you, and for standing there and doing nothing outside flourish and blots when my father was. And for the hippogriff, and for everything. I didn't even remember until these feelings started creeping in. I want to take it all back, but I can't. I can't even convince myself that you should forgive me, or that you should even look at me. Hermione squeezed his hand tightly, feeling his grip ease just a little. She realized she should have anticipated this moment, yet she found herself at a loss for words. Forgiveness wasn't something she had ever truly understood. She wasn't the type to let things go. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Her fists tightened, a reflex born from a desire for retribution. That had always been her way. When she thought about Draco's past actions and words, a wave of repulsion washed over her. But this feeling had shifted. It was no longer the fierce indignation of righteous anger. Instead, it felt more like a dissonance, akin to two magnets of the same pole pushed too close together. She could sense the man he had become diverging from the boy he once was. If I still felt that I needed to forgive you, Hermione said softly, I'm not sure I'd be able to. But it's been a long time since I've looked at you and seen someone who needs forgiveness. She gently traced her fingers along his jaw, his neck, and his shoulder. Now, I see someone else. At that moment, Draco looked at her, and Hermione recognized the fear and exhaustion in his eyes, the splintered pride. Yet she also saw desire, painful hope, and profound gratitude. It was the look of someone who was finally setting down a burden that felt as heavy as a lifetime. It was the gaze of someone who, in confessing his shame, had taken the first, most painful step away from it. She smiled softly and said, I see you.